Namaste. I'm Swati Vellal Raghunandan. I'm the founder director of Ishanya India Foundation. My gratitude to Usha Rengaraju and Neurodiversity India Summit for inviting me to share my thoughts. I want to begin this talk by shedding light on a blog I had read long back by a mother who has a son with autism. So I will begin by sharing that, talk a bit about neurodiversity in general, and talk about neurodiversity at work. So, this blog I was referring to begins with getting us to think about the brain as a machine. You know that your brain controls everything you do. You use your brain to do a lot of things, and your brain controls things that you don't even think about, like blinking. You don't have to remember to blink, right? It does it automatically for you. The same thing is true in autism. They use their brain for everything, but because there are differences in the way their brain is connected, there are differences in the way their brain reacts to things. Now, we all know that our brain is made of tissues and neurons and nerve cells. But let's pretend that it was a much simpler machine and it was made of metal and plastic and electrical wires. And let's pretend that when you put this together, it turns into a toaster. Now, let's pretend that most of us have toaster brains. Some of us might make light toast, dark toast. Sometimes we might even burn the toast. But for the most part, our brains would be able to do the same thing, make toast. So we would want to really have a world where it's really important, really valuable to make toast. Now let's pretend that an autistic person's brain is also made of metal and plastic and electrical wires, except that when his parts are put together, it turns into a totally different kind of a machine. Instead of being a toaster, it turns into a hairdryer. Now, there's nothing wrong with a hairdryer, right? Hairdryers are great. There are some things that hairdryers are really good for. But it's really, really hard to make a toast with a hairdryer. So in our pretend world, even though the person with autism has a perfectly wonderful hairdryer brain, it's going to be very hard for him because we've decided that the most important thing that people do in our world is to make toast. But on the other hand, think about this. When we toaster brain people have wet hair, we're really going to hope that the autistic person's brain and his hairdryer brain are around. It's the same thing in the real world with our real brains that are made of tissues and neurons and the gray matter. Because for most of us, when that important stuff gets put together, we have a certain type of brain. And we've created a society that says the most important things are the things that most of our brains are really good at. Things like communicating, making friends and spending time with people, doing a lot of different kinds of activities, having different kinds of interests, trying out new things. Because our brains are really good at those things, we try to spend most of our time doing them. But those are things, because of autism, the autistic person's brain may have a really hard time doing. So if you think about it, the human world is created for the majority, and it makes practical sense, right? But if you're not like the majority in some aspects or most aspects and are very different, then adapting to this world can be extremely difficult. This actually makes me think of the term normal. And if I have to explain this statistically, when we talk about normal, we're simply talking about the largest part of the bell curve, the percentage into which the greatest number fits. But then there are a lot of us who are towards the end. But because we all exist on so many dimensions, it's highly likely that all of us at some point may become outliers. I'm sure we all understand that disability is just one birth away or one accident away. But speaking of neurodiversity, which is an invisible disability, the situation is a little more complex. Although it's a very simple term used to describe neurological differences in the human brain. Neurodiversity is an umbrella term that includes conditions that are lifelong, that can develop throughout life as well. It includes acquired illness, it includes brain injury, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, learning disability, intellectual disability, and so on. I wouldn't get into the details of it, but all these conditions are interrelated and all stem from neurological differences. Although the medical model provides some clarity for clinical practice, there's a big community that argues for alternative ways of thinking. Within the neurodiversity movement, autism, for example, is conceptualized using the social model of disability, that a person is disabled not by their impairment, but the failure of their environment to accommodate their needs. Even for those with highest support needs, disability can often be minimized through environmental change and the provision of appropriate assistive tools. To give you all an example, we work with a young adult who is nonverbal. And when she came to us a few years back, we did our usual assessment, but we couldn't figure out what her level was, what her strengths were. We spent a lot of time with her. We spent a lot of time with the family trying to understand what her strengths were. After a few months of working with her, we introduced her to an AAC tool, and her interactions just improved exponentially. We were really blown away by the kind of responses we got from her. Here we were trying to teach an individual ABC, while her potential was to write a novel. But it was our inability to understand that she just needed a different medium to communicate. In fact, I'm very happy to share with you that she's one of the presenters in today's summit, and she's also worked on a book on short stories that we're hoping to publish soon. To bring in some statistics at this point, India has almost 3 crore people with disability, of which 1.3 crore are employable, but only 34 lakh of them have been employed across different sectors. And according to ILO report 2018, the cost of exclusion of persons with disabilities on India's GDP is estimated to be 7%. The country has a potential worker bandwidth of 3.4 lakh non-tech graduates, polytechnic diploma holders who could be skilled and brought into the mainstream service sector and knowledge industry to push per capita income. But despite most companies' increasing focus on D&I initiatives, the neurodivergent group is often overlooked. Also because most companies, I think, in the past, just looked at D&I initiatives more in terms of touching lives. But now we see a lot of companies are looking at it in terms of transforming lives, where you're working with the community to bring about the change. So the capabilities and talents of those with autism or ADHD or other related conditions are actually being recognized and are even sought after, particularly in the workplace. More and more firms now are starting to see neurodiverse members as competitive edge. Yet, unemployment, underemployment in those on the spectrum remains incredibly high all over the world. I think one of the biggest factors for this could be that not enough time is spent on understanding the strengths of these individuals and thereby not providing the right training to harness their potential. So as a society, what I think we really need is a change in perspective. Dr. Lawrence Fung, the director of Stanford Neurodiversity Project, gives a great example on leveraging the strengths of people with autism. He says how flexibility, for example, can be very difficult for people with autism. They can be very rigid at times. And during the process of working with them, you realize that they're also highly persistent, something we all value. If someone is really able to finish their work because of their persistence, they can be good. They can be a good asset to the company, right? What we've seen in other countries and what we're seeing in India today is organizations of all sizes across various industries can benefit from being neuro-inclusive by tapping into the strengths and skills of neurodiverse individuals. These may include new ways of solving a problem, higher levels of concentration, keen accuracy, ability to detect errors, reliability, persistence, etc. However, because neurodiversity is often invisible, it makes its identification or diagnosis harder. But the lack of awareness about this kind of diversity could result in colleagues and managers and other professionals not understanding the unique requirements of this population of workers. Since the pandemic, we've been seeing an increased interest by companies to hire neurodiverse individuals. However, it's becoming a little difficult to find the right candidate for the right job. We're currently working with a number of companies to factor in the idea of extended training program along with long-term internships, which can help them gain the right skill set. We feel that this can actually go a long way in ensuring that they find the right opportunity. And unless we do this consistently, we may not even know what works and what doesn't, because compared to a lot of other countries, the ground reality is very different here. But in our years of experience of working with various stakeholders, this is what we feel can create a neurodiverse workplace. Number one, a structured job analysis. It's important to work with the hiring managers and the team members to understand what they do, what is expected out of every individual in the team. Basically, analyze the day in the life of a candidate in that team, giving importance to micro details. And we really need to move away from abstracts and get into the specifics without assuming that everyone connects the dots in the same way. Number two, interview process. An inclusive and adaptive interview process where individuals are not judged by their inability to do something, but instead by their abilities and the value that they can bring to that particular job role. Number three, sensitizing the managers and the team. Help them understand the individual that they're going to be working with. Provide the best practices of interaction, instruction delivery, and coexistence. It's important to respect individual differences. I think a good manager would be able to understand how each team member works best, how they understand assignments, and adapt their style accordingly. Number four, a buddy system where each individual is assigned a team member or a mentor who can help them with day-to-day tasks, help them grow in the organization, and also provide emotional support if need be. I was recently reading an article which said organizations that provide mentors to employees with disabilities reported a 16% increase in profitability, 18% in productivity, and 12% in customer loyalty. Number five, job readiness and domain-specific training of the neurodiverse individuals. Number six, define a clear career path. Empower them to set short-term goals, long-term goals, and analyze the progress and help them achieve the same. And finally, creating that overall culture of inclusiveness. I remember listening to a TED talk, and the speaker says how we really need to move away from discussing and dealing with this topic as diversity and more about strengths and unique capabilities. So the concept of neurodiversity actually represents a strength-based model, which acknowledges that while some individuals learn and think differently, they are simply differences and not really deficits. A person with autism, for example, may have sensory sensitivity, but has a great attention to detail. So looking at autism or ADHD or other conditions from this perspective actually helps in creating opportunities that allow these individuals to experience success that they can capitalize on to persevere through other challenges. We all know that no two people are alike, and the same goes for those who are neurodiverse. But if you think about it, having a blended team can actually give way to various perspectives on a single problem. And that's how innovation is born. Honestly, the technology sector has so much to gain from neurodiversity. Not only are neurodiverse people catalysts for innovation, but they also represent a population of people for which they're creating products for. I remember reading about David, a 33-year-old with autism who began working in SAP's global post-sales operation department, and soon his team ran into a problem. There was no good system for dealing with internal work order requests, which simply got piled up in the department's email inbox. So what David did was he helped the team invent and put in place a ticket-based approach to process these requests in an orderly fashion. So neatly queued up, the requests became easy to visualize and track. I think it was his curiosity, it was his out-of-box thinking that helped in coming up with the solution. In fact, in this particular article, the manager says how he's been highly beneficial in improving the overall processes at the organization. I want to end by saying what organizations do to provide inclusive environment for the neurodivergent workforce can actually have a spillover effect on the entire workforce. What managers learn from finding solutions for the unique needs of neurodivergent professionals can be applied to the entire workforce. And common considerations for neurodivergent professionals may sort of alter the traditional HR practices, but can inevitably make the workplace better, safer, and more inclusive for everyone. Thank you.